do you find yourself at the moment, or this kind of ways to somehow elicit from the participant a measure of their self-assessed subjective well-being. And increasingly we've started to give this a lot of importance, because who better to tell you how they are than the people themselves, rather than trying to find proxies and so forth. And when it comes to measuring how good they're feeling, we tend to ask how frequently they felt certain negative emotions or certain positive emotions. For example, sneak peek, the Maltese tend to have a very high level of feeling nervous, especially when you compare how well they are doing by the doing well measure. So doing well but not necessarily feeling good. Very quickly, when it comes to measuring participation in the arts, I could go into culture more broadly, like social interaction and all that, but let me just focus on participation in the arts. We tend to measure active or passive participation. So which of these activities did you involve yourselves in this last 12 months, for example, whether as audience or whether as a producer or creator. We also tend to measure voluntary donation of time or money. That also correlates with well-being, we've found. We also tend to ask a very simple question: are you an artist? And that, again, very democratic, sort of lets the person themselves evaluate. I have to say that these measurements generally correlate with each other anyway. Okay? And generally our finding is that active participation tends to predict well-being more than audience participation. So there's a stronger link, but there is also a link between being a just audience or just receiving, consuming, and well-being.
Thank you, Maureen. Sunita, I'll ask you next. The link between culture and well-being is certainly evident in your work. Could you give us a bit of your work experiences in social prescribing?
Sure. Good morning all. Really lovely to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. So social prescribing is based on the idea that 1 in 5 general practice appointments here in England are non-biomedical, and our general practice appointments, I'm sure you understand that the concept, we have what we call GPs, which are local surgeries that we are free and entitled to go and have appointments with our GPs through the NHS system, the National Health System. So 1 in 5 GP appointments are non-biomedical, and that means that they are to do with mental health issues, social isolation, loneliness. They could be to do with housing, debt, relationship issues, for example. So these issues cannot be met by a biomedical intervention, i.e. a pill or a biomedical treatment that you get potentially in a hospital. And that's where social prescribing comes in. So social prescribing is based on 4 pillars. The first pillar is arts and culture and heritage. I think that's really important to remember. It's the range of arts, culture, heritage. The second pillar is physical activity. The third pillar is green and blue spaces, so the idea of your local parks, greenery, sea, river, water. And then the fourth pillar is information and guidance. And if we focus on arts and culture and heritage here, as per the conversation we're having, we know that there is significant improvement in people's physical and mental well-being when the intervention is arts and culture. So a couple of examples that I'll give you. So my mother has mid-stage dementia, and I look after her. I know when she goes to her weekly Age UK sessions, and there is singing and there is music, I can see the difference in her when she comes back in terms of her speech, in terms of her sharpness, in terms of her attention span. We know that music reduces the need for medication with those living with dementia by 67%. There is a study for that. We also know that there are interventions such as the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra here in the United Kingdom have a programme called Strokestra, and that's a programme for those that have suffered a stroke, and they use musical instruments and the use of musical instruments to improve finger dexterity and general mobility. There's also another programme by the organisation, the social enterprise called ESOP, that is a programme called Dance to Health. And that programme is working with older people. I think Charmaine at the beginning talked about the ageing population. It's working with older people and using dance to teach older people about balance, but also to teach them how to fall. That might sound very odd, because we don't want elderly people to fall, but actually we find that you only need an elderly person to fall over, break their hip, and that costs the NHS in this country about £100,000, £120,000 in total when you look at an ambulance, surgery, physio and such like. So what's really important with arts and health and social prescribing is that it's not just addressing an unmet health need, but we know there is evidence that it's alleviating a financial burden, but also a resource burden on the health system. And so that's why it's vital in a way that we think about arts and culture, not just in an arts government department, for example, but we think about how arts and culture can straddle and work with the likes of your health departments, your health teams, and therefore filter down into the community. Social prescribing is very much about health starts at home. It's not about going out. And it gives you that opportunity to really address somebody's mental and physical health through an artistic intervention. My last 30 seconds I've probably got. I'm just going to talk a little about the ecosystem of social prescribing. So social prescribing, you are referred to what's called a link worker in this country, and the link workers sit in your GP surgeries, in your local GP surgeries. So now GP surgeries aren't just doctors, they are healthcare assistants, they're physical health coaches, they're social prescribers, they're link workers. And link workers tend to work with those that have the most complex health needs. So that could be a young mother who's come along, very socially isolated, living in council housing, suffering from not only mental health issues because of the loneliness, but respiratory problems because of problems in social housing. And the link worker can address all of those issues. They can speak to a housing association, they can address respiratory problems, and they can social prescribe you to a local activity. So they might go, your local arts centre has got a mother and toddlers group every week. We're going to prescribe you that. We will cover any related costs for that. And the person will meet you and they will follow your development over the course of 6 or 10 weeks. A link worker works with a patient for about 6 months as well, and they have an hour with each patient a week, which is significant because in the UK, in England, your GP gives you 10 minutes. That's the allocated slot for your appointment. It's a 10-minute slot. There is another a layer for social prescribing, and then I'll finish up, and that layer is your voluntary, community, social and faith organisations. That's the idea that there is signposting, there is guidance, but there's also interventions and activity in your local community. So, for example, my mum's club that she goes to every week that happens to happen at the local church hall by Age UK, that's a prime example of a community faith intervention that is part of social prescribing. It's important to note that social prescribing it doesn't necessarily include the fact that I'm of a certain age and certain education, and if I feel a bit low, I could go and do something to help my mental health. That tends to be about those people who have a kind of a privilege or an access to money or digital and such like. So we're really looking at those two central points around link workers and around your voluntary community and faith organisations. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sunita. There's so much to say in such a short time. So biomedical solutions are not always the answer, and we can find many other solutions. That would lead me, in fact, to Rosetta de Battista. We must not give up on our music, Rosetta. I have a long question for you, actually several, but you have to try and answer in 3 minutes. Can you share your expert opinion on autistic practitioners providing the all-important safe space when working in your sector? Is it enough to have policies and strategies about the importance of having autistic practitioners in vulnerable care settings? What about quality assurance when dealing with vulnerable clients? Is this being addressed? Did I use the right word, clients?
So, is this working? Yes. Hello. First of all, I want to say how wonderful it is to be here, Arts Council giving us this platform. 30 years ago, these conversations were very few, and quite difficult. So for me, it just feels like the timing is right now for us to get more effective work, okay, in arts and well-being. There's many people in the room who day to day are working in this sector, can I just say. Artists, all of us, whether we paint, whether we play, whether we act, there's something that nourished our own lives. We wouldn't be here as the human beings we are. So there's a real personal connection. And I think many, many people in the arts also come to a realization of how wonderful it is when you share that opportunity. And I think that is what drives us forward. It's actually the impact it's had on us personally and finding a way to share that. It's a broad subject, and if we talk about passive engagement, you know, is there enough access, opportunity, the cost of attending events, is it viable for everyone? What's the setting like? I realise that 65%, well, there's a drop in engagement in people who are older. Why? Because it's events in the evening where they're more scared to go out. The financial burden, stairs, loos, wanting to just be free to move. So all these things obviously need attention. Is there enough promotion that reaches certain people to know they can be invited? There's a lot of work to be done in a more passive engagement, but here I'm talking more now about in a way, bringing the arts off the stage, off the wall, engaging with people in workshops. And I think as much as there's many, many things happening, actually, there isn't enough, or there needs to be more establishing, whether it is within the health sector, whether it is within schools, it's actually formulating long-term work. So far, it's been, and thanks to many artists, short-term projects in residential homes, in schools, with people and persons with disability. But I think there needs to be a real big effort to have a longer-term approach. I've often been part of, supported these short-term projects, even as a community theatre, Teatro Salesian. It's applying for funding for a project, and then it's gone. Every time I think of all the projects we've all been involved with, many of us, you think, oh, that stopped there, and that finished there, and you just want these opportunities to go on. So I think we really need to look at how things can become much more long-term. With that, I have to say, is training. You know, arts therapists, which is part of it. It's not that everyone needs to train as an arts therapist, but to have that foundation is really important, even if it means using some principles of confidentiality, a safe space, the time, the place, how interrupted the space is, how long-term, how do you deal with certain issues that come up. To know that Malta should have now training, whether it's community level or whether it's more intense intervention level, we need to really move to have accountability. And evidence-based practice. Again, there are people in the room who have been doing this work now for a number of years. I can see their faces. Really, we should be shadowing them and learning from them, because there is a lot of good work being done, but it needs support, long-term support. You know, I'm seeing CATS as well. We started that in 2006, which was just bringing awareness of the arts therapies. Things like this need to be really mobilized into action within different sectors, yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosetta. So we're pushing for going from projects to programs here, which is really important, which leads us to Arts Council and Dr. Simone Mbones. So Arts Council Malta has recently published the Right to Culture resource map in 2022, complementing Arts Council Malta Strategy 2025. Then we go from Malta's National Cultural Policy 2021 to Arts Council Malta Strategy 2025, a lot of publications, to implementation through these participatory processes like we are doing now today. And the concrete action plan after last December's workshops and this forum here. How can we bridge the gap between sectors and policy, and how can we enable this multi, cross-sectoral connections to take place? A big question. 3 minutes. Thank you.
So I strongly believe that really and truly everything is connected. Every sector, every person. Like trees are connected through their roots, I believe that we are connected and we nourish each other.
This is the poet speaking.
Really, I believe that the greatest challenge for people is to understand other perspectives. So, yes, we are affected by common realities, we are affected by various challenges, and they affect us all, and in different ways, and from different sides of the story. We are tackling the same narratives, really and truly. Our challenge is, however, to dig beyond, to dig beneath the surface, and to connect our practices. But first, we need to decode our different languages. We all speak different languages in our respective fields. Once we decode those languages, I believe that nothing is impossible, really and truly. Who actually, in 2023, the WHO report showed how health can help, how the arts and culture can help beat non-communicable diseases. The idea put forward was that the arts can help us to heal, even if the arts cannot cure. This is the idea of the arts supplementing medicine, really and truly. In the Budapest Conference 2022, Christopher Bailey, Arts and Health Lead at WHO, related his experience of struggling with obesity and cancer. And he had to say this about the arts. He said, the arts are not about curing, it doesn't cure cancer, but arts can heal. It's different. They create a sense of deep personal meaning that make your life beautiful, no matter the circumstances. And I think this is a very important realization. We need to shift the language around soft skills, because no matter how strongly we believe in the effect of the arts and in the importance of the arts, unless there is evidence, hard facts supporting the importance of these soft skills, we will not get there. So our focus as Arts Council is always to reach for the grassroots, to bring different experiences, different narratives, different skills together. Because that is the only way that we can approach reality holistically. Of course, this needs to be monitored, this needs to be evaluated, and this needs to translate into concrete measures. And only by looking at good practices from different cultures, different experiences, different contexts, I believe that we can manage this. so much more could be said. I'm trying to keep it as short as possible.
In fact, I'm really asking you another question now, so
Sure. So
if you want to close on,
yes,
on
yes,
something?
yes. No,
Okay.
I think for now, that's.
Thanks, Simone. Thank you so much. I'm so happy you mentioned the importance of soft skills, and also I would translate that also to the importance of soft power that culture and the arts have, also for being such, making countries and places so important, basically. Professor Marie, actually, Marie, I'm going to call you now. 3 minutes to tell us how you can tell us about your research on methodologies, measuring and impacts that you have carried out in the wellbeing sector. Perhaps you can also reveal, share some insight about unintended consequences that your research has revealed.
Okay, so to make this question perhaps more applicable to practitioners, let's say that we wanted to understand whether an intervention has an impact, okay? Whether this impact is positive. Nothing should be taken for granted. So I adopt 3 methods in my research, broadly speaking. The first is just to do a literature review, and I would encourage all of you to embark on this. You don't need special skills, you just need to look at good research that's already been done to find out what there is out there. The second method which I adopt a lot is to survey, and here the key thing is to make sure that the sample is representative, because if it's not, you don't actually know what you're surveying. And I have a lot of work on this which collects data about well-being in Malta, about participation in the arts, measured in various ways, but also about all the other factors in a person's lifestyle that could be contributing to that well-being. You cannot say an artist has a higher well-being just because they have higher scores, because there could be multitude other reasons why that artist has higher well-being, which is not the arts. For example, that they have more time on their hands, for instance. So we do a proper survey where we analyze all the factors that could be determining well-being, and then isolate the effect of the arts alone. And even then, even after you've accounted for the fact that artists in Malta generally have a higher level of education, generally engage in environmental activities more than the others, generally have, they're younger on the whole, if you take averages and so forth. Even after you account for all these facts, participation in the arts generates higher well-being. And that echoes the literature elsewhere. From these surveys, we also know that participation in the arts is really low in Malta, so active participation tends to be low, except in Festa. That tracks quite a lot of participation, and it does generate higher well-being among participants. So the third way, which is the gold standard way, and one which I would really encourage you to think about, and to think about collaborating with academics like myself who are interested in doing this, is to run an experiment. That is, not to unleash your intervention on a whole group, but to leave some people out, and then to measure the difference between those who got it and those who didn't. Almost like doctors do their tests, or pharmaceutical companies do their tests with medicine, okay? So what was the difference when you measure it this way? Now, when you do things this way, you can find out a lot of interesting things. For instance, one of our studies, which we did again with Arts Council, I have to say the Arts Council has been tremendous in encouraging this type of studies. Most of this work would not have been done if it weren't for the interest of the Arts Council. We wanted to test whether children who benefited from the Creative Fund actually did better in their creativity scores. So we did it in quasi-experimental way. We assessed those who got the creative and those who did not, but were very similar to those who did, in the same school, of the same age, and so forth. And we tested them for creativity scores before the intervention and after. Okay? What we found is that at the end of the year, everybody's creativity levels fell, regardless of creative or not. But because we measured before and after for the two groups, we also found that those students who benefited from creative had a smaller decline. So we were able to ascertain that a schooling year in general depletes creativity. But that participation, and the more actively they participated, the stronger was the result. Participation in creative mitigates this. So actually, the effect of creative was positive, but had we done it in a very naive way of just seeing creativity before and after, we would have thought that the effect of creative is negative. In fact, it wasn't. It's the school year that was negative, but creative was positive. Another unintended consequence, I won't be long, but just to give you a sense of why we should measure this kind of thing. The FESTA repeatedly emerges as a positive determinant for people who participate. But it is a very negative determinant for people who don't, and who don't like noise, litter, traffic, and so forth. So when you sort of, and this is why I think it's also good to do an evaluation in partnership with someone who's not so involved, because it's hard for a FESTA enthusiast to say, my activity is harming people's well-being. It takes a hard-nosed economist to say that, you know. You think you're doing well, but for a lot of people, it's actually negative in well-being. So this is the kind of reason why we want to measure stuff. Just one, okay, I'll say this at the end. So I'll stop here.
Thanks, Marie. Really important and really interesting, the impacts and of your research that you've been doing so well. In fact, what I would add to that is about you talking about schools and creativity. I always urge my students to listen to the old, now TED talk of Sir Ken Robinson, where he speaks about why schools kill creativity, I believe it's called. Anyway, fascinating. The arts right at the bottom. They're so important to well-being. Sunita, short question, but you can go on, I suppose, for a long time, but about 3 minutes, please. How effective is social prescribing? Can you tell us about why such evidence is important?
Firstly, that the TED talk, TED Robinson, is an amazing TED talk about creativity in children. It's phenomenal. It was pivotal for me. Yeah, I'm going to very briefly. So I've already given you examples of arts and health and the interventions and certain programmes. I guess what's important is picking up a couple of points that people have already said. Pilots are really important. So sort of what Marie was just talking about in terms of experiments, but pilots, which are very well evaluated with academic partnerships and an academic framework, really ensure that arts and culture have the evidence that comes out the other end, where we can then lobby, whether it's clinicians, whether it's health departments, health ministers, to show the impact of arts and culture on people's physical and mental health. And therefore, if you have a really effective pilot, and that pilot can be a small demographic or a certain number of people, then you can then talk about the scaling up of work. And I think it plays to what Rosetta was talking about earlier, which is kind of not having this parachutist approach, where we come in, do something and get out again, drop in, drop out. And actually, if we're able to have the evidence to lobby and to advocate for the impact of arts and culture on people's health, then you are more likely to develop sustainable and longer-term funding models, which therefore mean you don't just do 6 weeks programme and that's it, and those people are slightly left to their own devices. It also means you can start monitoring people's health and well-being in a much more longitudinal fashion, as opposed to just these 6 weeks ways. And that also means you start being able to talk a language, which we've talked about language. We start to be able to use a language which is applicable for art, for health, for budgets, for treasury. And again, you might think, gosh, you keep talking a lot about medical, teams and the health departments and treasury funding departments. But that's because at the end, that's where the purse strings are, certainly in England. And so we need to make sure that we're tooled up with the right kind of evidence that clinicians can support, that ministers can support, and that funders can support here as well. So it's not just necessarily Treasury and ministerial departments, but other funding bodies. And the other thing that I'm going to say is in England we have an all-party parliamentary group, an APPG, which crosses party lines, and there's one around arts and health, and that's been really important in terms of this being seen as a core government agenda, not just a party agenda, and that's been important in driving things. And we also have a really interesting model that's just happened for the National Centre for Creative Health, really interesting organisation, the NCCH. And they've appointed, I think it's 8 regional associates, because the NHS cuts up England into, it's 42 bits of the country, it cuts them up, but they've appointed 8 to cover the various regions. And these regional associates are experts not only in arts and culture field, but they also importantly sit within the NHS, within the health system. So evidence, and you can look up evidence, there's an amazing white paper on from the all-party parliamentary group, but also there's arts and culture evidence and what we call the plain English summaries, so we don't have too much academic speak, which slightly blows my mind sometimes in terms of being able to pull out the stats, but plain English speak on the National Academy for Social Prescribing's website. But those, they are able to bring together a set of evidence, which means we can lobby not only at sort of meta level in terms of speaking to government ministers and such like, but like those regional associates, they can lobby at a much more micro level, at a hyper-local level with local advocates. That might be local council, who again hold purse strings. It might be local voluntary community faith organisations that have purse strings as well. So evidence is really important for arts and culture to move away from sometimes what I think we can be in arts and culture, slightly hermetically sealed, and people perceive us as being slightly fluffy. We're absolutely not, and I've done 25 years in this industry and we're absolutely not like that. But we need the evidence, which has academic approval, and a framework that is, that is stamped, and therefore we can use that to lobby for much more positive effect, whether that's financial, long-term participant engagements. But evidence is absolutely crucial in that. That's my 3 minutes.
Thank you, Sunita. Perfect. Rosetta, we're a bit tight for time. It's a bit difficult to stop you. Okay, asking you a question, short. Can you share your experiences across different sectors, and is it important for the sustainability of programs and projects?
Okay, the 2 hats of Villa Bianca, I'm very, very proud to have helped the Malta Trust Foundation set this up. And I say that not only as a music therapist, but I think the message it's giving out there, that the arts are part of society's well-being. So I'm really happy to be investing time. Teatro Salesiano is a community theatre. For many years now, we've been doing work with different communities, diverse people and groups. Taking in from what's been said, I really wish that the pilot phase with evidence, and I think now I'm feeling so much that researching of the work that's being done by people in the arts is so important, and we need to really make these connections so that our work is followed. For example, Golden Years at Teatro Salesiano for the elderly. I'm starting it in a month. It needs to cross my mind more that this is an opportunity to see what the effect will be. So this, we forget sometimes, we're just too busy doing, and it needs that witnessing eye. But ultimately it needs money. Everything boils down to money. And we know there's currencies out there that are not money. This is why we are here talking about the arts. But I think we've been depending so much on the Arts Council, and we need to mobilize the people behind SAMOC, the people behind prison, the people behind services for addiction, migrant communities, the home affairs, residential homes, you know, I'm tired of doing short-term. Residential homes need to engage their own people in the arts as part of their teams. So it's actually really moving community theatres. So many can be much more active. So the local councils. So that's my situation, my viewpoint of we've come a long way. We can talk about it. It's fantastic to have this day and the workshops that led up to it. But we need other areas of our society just to do that and say, we want this as well. It can't just come from the arts sector. It needs to be the responsibility of education, of health, and all us as a society taking part in it. Thank you.
Perfect, Professor. Thanks for that. Simone, very quickly. Is there a plan for monitoring and evaluation of the outcome of these, perhaps, hopefully, action plan? And how can you ensure that Arts Council's strategy in this particular domain will be effective, so that we'll be able to get more money?
So we fully understand that in the end, what matters is what each sector has in its toolkit to address aches and pains and loneliness. And we need to we know that we need to create an environment where people can feel better. We believe that there is no better way to do this than to keep on bringing people together, and we in fact will be embarking on a number of intersectoral working groups. Really and truly, this was also the approach that we employed when we were creating the resource spec, not assuming that we have all the answers. The answers are, in fact, spread around different sectors, and we know that fully well. We also aim to have a campaign even in schools to help students to build their resilience, even through the arts. We seek to help people, to mobilize them to approach the situation as allies rather than rescuers. We strongly believe that energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. So we are focusing on, energizing the sector in this way, through connectedness.
Thank you. Thanks, Simone. Okay, so we're a bit tight for time. In fact, what I wanted to add to that, besides obviously the local entities, the possibility of coming together and applying for EU funding. Let's not forget that. It's not only local. We have 1 minute each for this section, and we can start concluding. We have 4 experts here. Can you tell me, actually not ask, I'm asking you. Let's not miss the opportunity to ask each of you if you can propose one tangible recommendation to government, whether it's a policy initiative or a budget consideration for 2025. Marie.
I would simply say that we need to put more funds into assessing, building the evidence base, even training people in how to assess. Okay, so while we could also make funds subject to assessment, so you have to have an evaluative component if you're going to get a large enough fund. While being careful, of course, not to destroy the initiative itself with too much poking and measurement and so forth, and being aware that not everything is going to be measured perfectly and so forth. I want to add a little note on Rosetta's appeal that even private companies, especially with their obligation for ESGs now, what used to be corporate social responsibility, there is a lot of potential for them to have sustainable well-being program. In private sector, they tend to call it wellness, but really, you know, we're overlapping.
Thank you.
Yes, and I have many pitches and meetings with these business communities. There's a little area that becomes very tricky. Now what's more innovative next year? And next year, again, we go back to long-term, established, good, strong foundations. So that worries me because the culture is like that. I will dip in. No, we build from here, 2 years down the line with more evidence, to 5 to 10. You need to have strong foundations that last long. So I think maybe my appeal is, it needs to be very tangible, but a longer term approach. And I am quite concerned right now with how little or how much more can be done within schools for certain individuals, whether they have a visible disability, whether it's invisible. I think it is time that our education system really looks at the provision of more one-to-one creative arts therapies, because it is becoming an increasing problem in schools.
Thank you. Sunita, very quickly. The proposal for
my-
Malta.
Yeah, my proposal for would be to create a master plan for arts and culture, a bit like Rosetta says, that looks at 1, 3, 5 and 10 years, and that looks to fund meta-level changes, i.e. policy and lobbying changes, as well as micro projects which can be delivered at a hyper-local level.
Fantastic. Simone.
Yes, like in the same way that the state invests in free medicine, I would say that it's about time we consider also supporting the supporting availability and exposure to arts therapy. Also, right now, we have this fully fledged campaign relating to mental health and stress and all that. I believe that the arts have a very particular role to play here.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if we have time for